Hello, I'm Ollie, and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, trash, I'm doing a Garb August review of Naked Came the Stranger by Penelope Ashe. Okay, so firstly, let's talk about authorship. So, the most important thing, or the most interesting thing about the book is that it wasn't, in fact, written by somebody called Penelope Ashe. It was actually written by a group of critics, I think about 20 of them, um, who banded together around a guy who I think worked for Newsweek. Um, and they were having a late night discussion in a bar or something like that, a few of them, about the fact that so many popular books in the US were obsessed with sex and were quite formulaic, and they looked down on these books and did not consider them to be decent books, to be good books, to be books that were worthy of being successful. And they refer to them as BM books, big money books. So they decided to get a bunch of people together and to try and write themselves a book in the same vein as the kind of books that they were decrying. And the books in particular, I think, were things like kind of Harold Robbins books, who I've talked about on the channel before, and also Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne. So those were, kind of in the late 60s, those authors, those books were really big business in the US and internationally indeed. And this group of people were offended, I think, by that to an extent. So they decided to get a bunch of them together and to write a book to prove that no matter how bad a book was, as long as it had a lot of sex in it and obeyed the kind of general rules of these kind of books which they laid out, that it would sell. So they did that, and Naked Came the Stranger was the result. So this is the original cover. They've added a couple of extra bits on, but the image and the lipstick kind of tally are from the original cover. I think it's a fantastic cover. It's not hard to see how the book sold with a cover like that. So initially, I think it sold, I'm trying to remember now, like either 10 or I think it was 20,000 copies. So it sold pretty well. It wasn't like a runaway bestseller in the same way that something like Valley of the Dolls was, but it sold decently. And then after a while, they did come out and reveal what they had done. So they appeared on some TV talk show where it was advertised that Penelope Ashe was going to be interviewed, and actually this big group of male critics turned up. And thereafter, the book got obviously a lot more publicity and it sold a lot more copies. So it ended up selling like 100,000 copies in the first year or something like that. And subsequently has, continued to sell. And it's interesting that it's still in print. So I'm not sure if it's been continuously in print since it was published, which was in 1969. But it's, you can still buy it today. And had it not been a book written by a bunch of critics, had it been what it appears to be, i.e., a book written by one author that was just a bit trashy, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be in print anymore. So let me talk about the book. So I want to talk now about the book, what it's about, and what it's like, and then kind of close by talking about my opinion of the whole, the whole venture of them trying to write a deliberately trashy book. So what's the book about? So the book is about a couple called Billy and Jilly, who have a talk show, like a radio show, which I think goes up on a Sunday morning or something like that, where they talk about topical stuff basically, but not necessarily newsy stuff, more just like social stuff and that kind of thing. And particularly marriage, so they talk about marriage a lot in their show. And you get, throughout the book, you get excerpts from their, like the kind of transcripts of their show. Anyway, Jilly finds out that Billy has been unfaithful to her with an intern who works on the show. She's always been faithful, but she decides that she's going to get her own back. She's going to, be as unfaithful as she can, basically. Hence the tally on the cover of the book. And the remainder of the book is chapter by chapter, just her sleeping with a different man. Basically, it's as simple as that. So there is no real ongoing story, and I think the structure of it was quite deliberate in terms of, if you think about how it was written, in that each chapter was given to a different person to write. And they do actually do a pretty good job of maintaining the style and the tone of the book throughout the chapters, although some of the encounters are definitely a bit crazier and more out there and more obviously kind of spoofy than others. But it's quite entertaining. It is quite entertaining. So yeah, effectively in each chapter she seduces a man, many of whom are kind of pillars of the community. So they live in this small town called something Neck. I can't remember what it's called. They live in this King's Neck. They live in this small town, and she basically goes through the kind of great and the good of the town. The sex is not particularly explicit by modern standards, but what's interesting is that she basically ends up destroying all of the men. She ends up changing them in some way, and she very deliberately uses them once. They all largely become obsessed with her and want more, and she just casts them aside, and often ruins their marriages or whatever as a result. So she's almost using them as a proxy for her husband, and getting her revenge on them as cheating men, as well as on her husband. So it's quite an interesting concept, and it does work quite well. But as I said, some of the encounters are much more bizarre than others. They're all pretty bizarre, but some of them are really, really bizarre. So let me just get my page references up. So there's one towards the end where the guy she gets with is someone who has been mentioned earlier on in the book. There's a bit earlier on in the book where she gets this phone call, like a dirty phone call, by a guy who calls himself Jack the Fucker. So he says, like, you've heard of Jack the Ripper, I'm Jack the Fucker. And she ends up figuring out who this is, and seduces him. And it turns out that he is a guy who appears to be like a mild-mannered accountant, but actually, and that's what his wife thinks he does, but actually he writes pornography, and that's how he makes his money. And some of the dialogue between them as this stuff comes out is quite brilliant. So let me read you a small snippet from it. Jilly sat close to him and nibbled his ear. An honest-to-goodness pornographer, she said. Ansel Vast shrugged with pride. The best in the business, he said. It's a pleasure to meet you, said Gillian. Listen, you'll have to autograph one of your books for me. Certainly, said Vast, with my prick. So yeah, as the scene progresses, you discover that actually he's impotent and he can only get aroused through the books that he writes. And Gillian wants to have him, so she decides that she suggests that they act out a story, and the story they act out is very strange indeed. So let me read it to you. So this is him speaking. No, I can't get it up. You can, Ansel, you can. We'll act out a story. Varth looked at her. Yes, she said, we'll act out a story. How? Well, Gillian was thinking fast. Let's make believe that I'm a lady chimpanzee and you're a big horny camel. Varth dropped his pencil. See, shouted Gilly, I'm a chimpanzee. She scratched herself under the arms and chattered. See? Varth saw. He leaned over and loped towards her as if he were indeed a desert beast. I'm a camel, he shouted. I'm a camel. Gilly hopped around, chattering. I'm getting it up, Varth yelled. I'm getting it up. Gilly chattered faster. I'm a camel, screamed Varth screamed. I'm a camel. Hump me, Gillian shrieked. Hump me. It's all absolutely bonkers, and they deliberately take it to extremes like that. But it does kind of work as a book. The ending is very abrupt, and there are definitely some things that, as a modern reader, despite the enjoyable trashiness of it, as a modern reader, there are some things that are a little bit difficult to take. So, for example, one of the men she seduces is gay, and happily in a gay relationship. And naturally, she makes him, by sleeping with him, she makes him realise that actually he's straight, and he abandoned his boyfriend. And there's also, black characters are mentioned in this book, but are never central to the book at all, and are, clearly considered to be by the cast of the book, the characters in the book, very much second-class citizens. So, the help, effectively. That was a bit difficult as well. But overall, it is an enjoyably trashy read. It did make me laugh out loud at times. Which brings me to my real reservations about it, which are the fact that it's not a true trashy book, because it was written by effectively a bunch of snooty critics who didn't like the fact that these books were gaining popularity, who looked down on these books, and who thought it would be amusing to hoax the public by writing a book in that style, which I think is a little bit condescending, and also feels like they felt threatened by the success of these books, because their livelihood as critics depends on readers trusting their opinion, and following the lead that they set. And if books suddenly are becoming very popular, which they have given poor reviews to and derided, then that's a bit of a threat to them, isn't it? So I thought that was interesting, and that whole kind of concept, whilst I did enjoy the actual book, that whole the whole concept did leave a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. Although I think it's fascinating, and I kind of love the idea of a hoax book. Also, the motivation behind it, I think is almost counter to my motivation for starting Garb August. And the thing that really brought that home to me is, so I've said, so there's an introduction in this book where one of the people who is involved writes about the conception of the book and the process of writing it, and so on and so forth. And I've said that they talk about Harold Robbins and Jacqueline Suzanne, but towards the end of that introduction, they also mention as a writer that they consider to be rubbish, Evan Hunter, who is, if you've watched the channel for any length of time, you will know is my favourite writer. So Evan Hunter, also known as Ed McBain, who wrote the Ed 7th Precinct series, which is my favourite book series of all time. So the fact that they single him out as a particularly bad writer, when I think he's a fantastic writer, 100% turned me off the whole endeavour. Fortunately, I didn't read the introduction until after I'd read the book, so I deliberately left it till the end. So it didn't sour the experience of reading Naked Came the Stranger for me. But yeah, it cemented to me the fact that these were critics who were being, I think, a bit defensive of their patch, if you like. And I think that there's something a bit distasteful about that, and a bit elitist, and yeah, it just doesn't appeal to me as a concept in that sense. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Naked Came the Stranger. Okay, time for a random book from the shelf. So I thought I'd go with something completely different. So I've got this, which is a Ladybird book from, I think, probably from the 60s, around the same time. Certainly pre-decimalisation. Oh, first published 1961. So yes, it was 2 shillings and 6pence. So I don't know if Ladybird books are known internationally. I think they possibly are in countries like Australia and Canada, but perhaps. But I don't know if they are in the US. But in the UK, they were less so now, but they were absolutely huge for kids, and they are nicely little produced hardback books about different subjects. So this one, as you can see, is Great Inventions, and it has a rather charming series of illustrations and a little bit of text, at a high level clearly, but not not patronisingly written, about different inventions. So I found this, I think in a charity shop or something like that a little while ago, and just thought it was rather lovely. And it reminded me, I don't remember reading this one when I was a kid, but it reminded me of other Ladybird books I had read as a kid. So I grabbed a copy of it, and it has been on the shelves ever since. Yeah, so Naked Came the Stranger was my first book of Garb August, and I thought it was an interesting pick for book one, because in many ways it fits the Garb August brief in that it is a trashy book with lots of sex. It ticked off, I think, three things on the bingo card. So it's a dirty book, it's got nudity on the cover, and it was written under a pseudonym. So, it was a good start for the bingo card for me. But equally, as I've said, where it came from is very different from most trash. And I'm not sure I'm entirely comfortable with the motivations behind it. So as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well. Hope you are reading good stuff. Let me know what you've been reading for Garb August so far. Let me know if you've read Naked Came the Stranger. But until next time, hope you're safe and well, and I will speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.